So thank you all for being on time and for joining us. My name is Sinead Young, and I am a professor of psychology at Morehouse College and also director of the Institute for Social Justice Inquiry and Praxis with the Andrew Young Center at Morehouse. And I'm so pleased that our colleagues my colleague from Clark Atlanta University, Dr. Sabrina Riles, has been joining me on this effort to just make students more aware of policy, careers, and options in the entire Atlanta University Center. So for those who are joining us, we have a nice variety of folks from different disciplines, from different areas, which is really what we like to see. This is the second year that Morehouse, Clark Atlanta, Spelman College, and now Morris Brown are partnering with the RAND Corporation and Party RAND Graduate School to put on a hackathon. And so you're going to learn a little bit more about what a hackathon is later. But this is our second hackathon. We're so pleased to be partnering with RAND and Party RAND, as I said, just to expose students to policy, careers, and everyone should know about policy. So we have students from all over the Atlanta University Center. Last year, we looked at COVID-19 pandemic and recovery efforts. This year, our theme is Justice Reinvested. And so we're going to be exploring public safety options for a lot of what we see going on in the news. So, we're going to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later towards the end. Before I begin, I just want to thank our colleagues who I don't think they're on the call yet, but Karen Edwards and Zaire Overton, who have really been helping to manage this effort. And this is going to be the first of 2 webinars that we're going to be doing. So this evening, as you all know, the webinar is entitled Problem Solving and Data Analysis. Think like a filmmaker, artist, and musician. So I'd like to start by introducing our guests, our panelists. So joining us this evening, we have a Hong Kong-born, California-based artist, Shirley Say, who works in the media of sculpture, installation, photography, and text. She at once deconstructs the world of synthetic objects that carry paradoxical meanings and constructs models in which differences might come together. Say has been on the faculty at California Institute of the Arts since 2001, where she held the Robert Fitzpatrick Chair in Art from 2018 to 2021. And Say's CV is much longer, her bio is much longer. I've sent it to all of you, so please do check that out when you have a chance. Joining Say, we have Todd Richmond, who is the director of the Tech and Narrative Lab and a professor at the Party RAND Graduate School. Richmond is also a multi-instrumental musician, a visual artist, and conceptual troublemaker. Early in his career as a chemistry professor at the Claremont Colleges, he incorporated multimedia and web technologies into his teaching and research. That work led him to evolve from his specific focus on chemistry to instead pursue a broader understanding of technology and content. So we have quite the dynamic panel for you. Before we begin, I'm just going to ask, we've all been on Zoom for a couple of years now, so I'm going to ask that you all please mute yourselves. And if you have questions, please direct them towards the chat. If we have time towards the end, we will try to get to all of your questions. And once again, this is the first of 2 webinars that we'll be doing leading up to the hackathon. If you don't know what the hackathon is, we're going to explain a little bit more about that later, and there is still time to apply. So without further ado, I would like to send it over to our guests. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Sinead. And it's a pleasure to see everyone here virtually, because virtual and physical has kind of become blurred for a long time, and I've actually been working in that blurring. So we're not gonna, we'll maybe talk occasionally about the hackathon specifically, but we wanted this talk to be a little bit weirder, because we have enough non-weird things in our life. So, and it would help if I could, there we go. So we're under the guise of talking about problem solving and the way that you think creatively about data and about things, we want to focus on process as opposed to product. So this talk is going to be kind of messy, and that's really by design, because process itself is very messy, and we're going to talk about a number of different processes. And just to put in a pitch for the non-linear background through your careers, as Sinead was talking about, a career in policy. My formal training is in math and chemistry, but I've taught in a chemistry program, a business school, a film school, and now a public policy school. And I don't have degrees, and actually I've never taken a class in business, film, or public policy. So that just goes to show that the world is also messy as well. Two of the things that are really important to, I think, both of our practices are using analogy and metaphor. So instead of thinking literally about everything in the world, take something that you understand and use, and then try and apply that in a different part of your world. And I think we'll talk more about how we do that. And I'm big on conceptual models.
I love conceptual models.
Shirley loves conceptual models. So we find them very useful for helping to not only answer questions, but figure out what the question is in the first place. Because if you're working in an area that's truly innovative, you don't know what a right answer looks like, and you may not even know what questions to ask.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
I see all my sculpture as model for three-dimensional thinking. So that goes to tell you how much I like model. So this is the talk. We're going to tell you 11 short stories, and since we're trying to bring this in under an hour, they will be in fact short stories. But given the backgrounds that we saw coming through the chat, hopefully one or more of these will resonate with you. So let's just dive into it. So digital. We've changed this slide a couple times. We've gone back and forth on actually what belongs on this. And we kind of like this, technology changes. It changes things, and technology itself changes. But I would argue that digital is probably one of the biggest factors that's changed in our lifetimes. And some of the people on this call actually have never known a world without profound digital capabilities. So let's talk very briefly about what digital is really good at. The first thing is it scales really well. You can make essentially infinite copies of a digital thing like a file. Digital is highly portable. If you have a current smartphone, you have a supercomputer in your pocket that far exceeds what NASA used to put someone on the moon. And it's easy to modify. So remix culture that started to arise in the early 2000s is really driven by digital's ability to be easily modified. I'm a big believer in yin and yang. So if you have pros, there have to be cons. So what are some of the cons of digital? Well, the first is that it's infinitely scalable. So people expect everything to be up and available anywhere, anytime in the world. It's highly portable, meaning your data can get up and walk away. And your personal data is right now in the hands of any number of bad actors around the world. That's just the reality of our digital world. And then digital is easy to modify. And it turns out that that is problematic. First, the good news. You can do things now that were dreams of science fiction writers 50, 100 years ago. Incredible things that we can do with digital technology. The problem is that security and privacy are gone, and they probably will never come back, at least in what humans previously thought of as security and privacy. And surveillance is constant. And in fact, our economy is largely based on surveillance. And then the third one, which is very troubling to me, evidence no longer exists. and humans don't know how to live in a world without evidence. So we're going to have to navigate that. The reality is that what we refer to as the real world is now not just the physical real-time analog world. The virtual world is real, and it has real effects. So one other really interesting outcome for researchers, it used to be that data was hard to come by, and it was very expensive to do computation if you had large data sets. These days, that is no longer the case. There is essentially unlimited data that is available out there, and computation is becoming incredibly cheap. So the way that we think about doing research and data analysis has changed profoundly over the last 20 years. All right, so we said we're going to tell stories, so let's talk briefly about what we think a story is. So Harper Reed is a really interesting guy, entrepreneur. He served as Barack Obama's chief technology officer during his 2012 re-election campaign. So evidently Harper did a good job on that side of things. He's on the advisory group for the Tech and Narrative Lab. And we were talking a month or two ago, and he uttered, narrative is 100% of everything. And I had to think about that for a second, and I couldn't disagree with him. So let's talk a little bit about story versus narrative. This is a definition I like, and then Shirley is actually going to take exception to the one that I like. So I like the framing that a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that a narrative has a beginning and a middle, but that the end is still being written. I find this to be a very poetic description, but what you don't like this.
I like this too, but I think, to me, narrative has less to do with, you know, beginning, middle, and end. To me, narrative is a structure in which meaning is constructed, meaning that actually human being is a narrative being, because we need to put things in a sequence so that will make sense to us. Otherwise, we'll all become insane. So that's just how I see narrative. So it does not necessarily need to have beginning, middle, and end.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So when you think about story, and since I've spent almost 4 decades in Los Angeles, where every Starbucks has multiple people on laptops writing screenplays, you can map it out. So when you hear about people talking about a story arc, this is what they're talking about. The fact that in the beginning, you have to expose who the characters are, what the dynamic is, that you have some action, that there's a climax, and then there's some sort of resolution. So this is the classic map of thinking about story. And what's key here is that there's motion in the arc, and it's not just a linear collection of facts. So it's not just this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened, that there's a flow and that there's energy and there's emotion that's playing through this. This is another definition that I really like, and it ties story to experience, and the fact that humans live their life and they experience things, and the way that they then, I think, for themselves make sense out of what happened to them. They construct stories, and then they transmit that to other people. So when we were driving to the municipal pool to swim laps this morning, we got into a long discussion about our internal narratives and sort of how we construct those and how we think about those things. And if you've read Kierkegaard, which I actually haven't, I cheat, I just steal the quote, but Shirley's read Kierkegaard. He talks about the fact that you're not really solving problems, but that you need to experience reality. So are you with Kierkegaard on this one?
I am with him, yeah. So he directly influenced Nietzsche, which I'm a fan of Friedrich Nietzsche's work. He's a life philosopher. So philosophy is written in order to serve life, serve living, rather than dictate it. So
wasn't Nietzsche a nihilist though?
No, I would not think that, but some people.
Some
I
people
mean,
do associate
yes,
him with
yes,
nihilism.
but I don't think he is. He's a life philosopher.
All right. Next, bias.
Oh, yes. So, well, I often told Todd, what happened to my student at Cal. So this is actually a photo of a foundation class from a few years ago. Foundation is the first year undergrad student. And they will be making some artwork, and then I see that, oh, you should check out so and so artist's work, because you have affinity with that kind of practice. And then quite a few of them was like, no, I don't want to look at other artists' work. And then I asked them why. I think they have this sort of fear that if they look at other artists' work is going to come influence their work, and then will negatively impact their originality, which I find, I think it is common to young artists to have such worry. But to me, the solution to that fear of having, like unconsciously using other people's ideas, that instead of looking at one or two artists, just look at 100 artists. Then you don't really have that problem. And I think you, Todd, you were describing this condition as the student don't want their work to be biased, which I find an interesting way to put it.
Well, the other, I mean, the colloquialism is that in order to break the rules, you first have to learn what the rules are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think isn't that sort of another way of thinking that part of the art education is you study other artists and you learn the rules that they had, so that you can then go and make your own thing. There's
another way to look at it that way. Yes, that's true.
So I thought it was interesting, though. So Shirley, actually a week from
less than a week
from now, she gets on a plane to fly to Norway and then get on a 3-masted schooner to go to the Arctic Circle for a residency joint with scientists and artists. So when we were talking about this, I thought it was interesting because you have no idea what work you're going to make. You're not going there thinking, I want to go to the Arctic so that I can make a sculpture based on glaciers.
Yeah, this is the residency. It's called an Arctic Circle residency, and you apply, and I successfully apply and got it. And I often joke to my artist friend, they will ask me like, what do you propose to make there? And then I would say, actually, my proposal is to do nothing. And well, actually, the real title of my proposal is In Search of Zero Impact Sculpture. So I started out by saying, a round trip flight from Los Angeles to Oslo, Norway, is going to cause 2.8 tons of carbon emission. There's nothing I can really make that will offset the carbon emission. So I think the least I can do is to come up with a zero impact project for this residency. So I don't want to take anything from the landscape. I don't want to cause any kind of displacement, even this natural material. I don't want to leave anything in the environment. And in the past, I have done work where I create sculpture, often a kind of synthetic material sculpture, and I put it in natural landscape. And I take picture of them. But this time I don't even want to do that, because I don't want to spend the time sitting behind a camera and not experience the land with, the animal. So I want to be present. So my main goal is to be present. So to borrow your analogy, my fellow residency artists, there's a number of them are going to be doing photography and recording. And so in a way they have the hammer, and then they will go to the Arctic Circle and they look for nail. But to me, I'm not bringing any hammer. I'm just bringing my 5 senses, and totally going to leave it open, as open as possible. I guess the contrast to the previous slides is where my student feel threatened by being biased by other artists, for this project I'm going to do, I am going to be completely open.
Right.
So there will be, in order to have the unbiased project that I will make, but I have no idea what it is.
Which causes,
Which is really exciting.
which is exciting, and it's stressful not knowing what you're going to do, right?
Yes.
It's a lot of times we want to know the answer before we do what we're going to do. And we'll get to that later, a little bit later, actually.
But I think, I think a young artist will be really scared if they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
But I'm at a mid-career, stage of my practice now that I don't have that fear anymore.
Right.
It feels very exciting, actually.
All right. So from bias to molecules. So in a previous life, I was a chemistry professor, and one of the classes that I taught was organic chemistry. As the joke goes, organic chemistry is usually the class that turns pre-med students into pre-law students. And I would argue if it does that, it's because it's usually taught incorrectly. So for any of those, I usually try and give a trigger warning for anybody who may have taken organic chemistry before I show this slide. Sorry about that. But usually it's taught as a bunch of what I call what. So you get a list of these reactions, you put them on 3x5 cards, you memorize them, the names of the reactions, and then you take a test, and your test is just pattern matching. And you don't know any chemistry, you know how to memorize things and pattern match. If you go a little bit deeper into it and you start to understand how the reactions happen, so this is the mechanism of action of an ACO chloride, it's called an SN2 reaction, just to show I can still remember some of my chemistry PhD. This is thinking mechanistically, so how things work. I was lucky enough when I was an undergrad to study with Pat Traylor, and she was an amazing woman. She was born in San Francisco, Japanese heritage, interned in the camps during World War II as a child, and then went on to get a PhD at Harvard in chemistry in the 50s, when that was not something that women did, especially Asian women. And then I was lucky enough to have her as faculty and a mentor. But we walked in the first day of organic chemistry to the Schrodinger wave equation, and she said, you are going to understand why molecules do what molecules do, why bonds form. And essentially what she was doing, and then what I went on to do when I was teaching, is I was trying to get people to think like a molecule. If you can start to wrap your head around why a molecule does what a molecule does, now you can predict things that you haven't seen and haven't memorized. So that's how you synthesize knowledge. Memorization does not allow you to synthesize knowledge. Memorization is just regurgitation. And more broadly, I consider this layers of an onion. So describing what something is the outermost, it's what you see first, but it's kind of the shallowest level of understanding. If you understanding then how something works, but then why it works is, to me, the most interesting, and it also gets to intent. And we always want to understand what is motivating somebody. If you want to influence somebody, if you are a policymaker, for instance, and you want to influence people, you need to understand why they're doing the behaviors that they're doing. And so getting to why ends up being really important. Gravity. So from chemistry to physics.
Yeah, you are a chemist, and as a sculptor, I think I work with problem of physics more than chemistry. And, in my undergrad, I actually did study painting. So, and unlike painting where you can really use your imagination and make things go anywhere you want, it's easy to paint something that's floating in the middle of the air. But I was very drawn to sculpture, actually, as far as challenge that we have to work with real life material against gravity. And that is an interesting challenge to me, that, you still use your imagination, but with your imagination, it needs to be mediated by real world physics. And this is an example of a piece that called Negotiated Difference. It's an installation that was made for the Hong Kong Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, which is an international exhibition that happened in Venice, Italy every 2 years.
It's the Olympics of the art world.
Yeah.
The Venice Biennale is kind of the most important.
One narrative will be described that way. So, but maybe there's another narrative. Anyway, I just want to let you know what it is. It is the components, hand carved wood spindle that me and my assistant turn on a lathe, and then they are connected by a zillion. It feels like a zillion. Joinery that have different angle that is all 3D printed, and we printed it in wood and metal filament, and so they're all I guess the physical term is a press hole, so they're held together.
Friction
yeah,
fit.
the friction fit, so they all held together by friction. And there's not a single nails or screws used.
Or glue or no adhesive.
Right. So that's
no braces.
When we install it, you cannot do it by one person. It's always we'll get to the next time. You need at least 2 or 3 people holding things and trying to figure out, how you can form the balance. And the principle of the configuration is that there's no fixed configuration. So it could, has been installed in 3 different spaces already. So each space is different. So when you are at the site, then you have to kind of play this game of trying to figure out how you bring this element together in a fight against gravity.
And the language is site responsive.
Yes.
So this is modular work, which the way that it ends up depends on how it's assembled, and if you're doing it right, you are listening to the room that you're in and figuring out how this is going to fit.
Yeah.
And I use listening. Oh, actually, I want to go back to this. Do you want to tell your story about why bowling pins are important to you?
Oh,
of your past?
Oh, you mean my childhood?
Yes.
Well, this is a segue. I love bowling pins because in high school, do we have to talk about this? One of my after school activity is that I hung out with my friend in a bowling alley, and usually there's like triad
gang members that were hanging out in the bowling alley. So that was, yeah, I think that's an interesting mini story. So I mentioned site responsive and listening to the room. So listening is the next story. So back in 2011, I went to Nashville to Victor Wooten. Victor's the one with the microphone here. Most amazing guy in the world, probably the greatest, one of the most creative bass players ever. Next to him is Chuck Rainey, who has played on over 10,000 studio hits, Aretha Franklin, most of Steely Dan's seminal work. So Victor runs something called Bass Nature Camp, and he has about 150 acres outside of Nashville. And you go there for a week and you immerse yourself with these masters of the instrument, and it's bass in nature because you do rotations where you work on music things, but then one of your rotations a day is doing things out in nature. So you learn how to read tracks. Animal tracks was one of the basic things. And then you do a blindfolded walk. And his whole point was that nature and music are completely intertwined, and you have to tune in. This is getting to your listening.
It's site responsive.
It's site responsive, and you need to be in the moment.
Right.
So one of the exercises is when we would do a rotation, and this is Anthony Wellington in the center of this. I studied with, and he's in the light blue at the right side of the picture. I studied with Ant for a couple of years, and you met Ant. He came out.
Yeah.
He came out to LA when they were on tour, and we hung out with them in the tour bus for a while, and it was all kind of cool. But one of the rotations would be that Ant would be playing chords and you would point at someone and you would take a solo. And I was in a room like this, and it was Victor and it was Ant, and they pointed at me. So I played like my best licks, right? And they both stopped, and Victor looked at me and said, you know, Todd, you had some really interesting things to say, but you weren't talking about the same thing that Anthony and I were. And I kind of wanted to find a crack to crawl into, because that's devastating, but it also like completely opened my mind to the fact that while I was playing, all I was doing was focusing, I was only listening to myself. I wasn't listening to what they were doing. And when I came into solo, I wasn't listening to them. In my head, I was running through what licks I was going to play. So that, and it was funny because when I flew back, the night I flew back, I actually had a gig that I had subbed somebody for near the airport. So Shirley picked me, or no, I took a cab.
You have your own gig at the trip.
Well, no, I came and I danced with you, remember? Because there was another bass player that covered the gig.
Right. Yeah.
And she commented that I came back a different person.
Totally did. You never did.
And I think a big part of it was because I had gotten torn down and then built back up, and it was really all around listening.
Right.
Negotiation.
So this again,
same piece.
It's the same piece,
different,
but it's a
different part of it.
way of talking about this piece. The title is called Negotiate Difference, but then the exhibition title is actually called Stakeholder, and I'm going to get into it in a second. I want to emphasize the fact that, remember telling you that it's a little bit of a game, and indeed, you know, many people try to describe this piece as, you know, is it kind of like a 3D Lego? You know, and then I said, yes, it is like a Lego, except that in a Lego, you will have a uniform entity, like units, right? Yeah, very uniform units. But for negotiate difference, each piece is completely different. There's not you know,
there's no standard.
There's no standard to it, because I believe in a collectivity. The individual pieces are indeed different than each other. They're unique. So, you know, I thought about it, the idea, talking about public policy, I thought about the idea of the dynamic between individual versus society, or individualism versus collectivity a lot, you know, because I was born and raised in Hong Kong, a former British colony. So I literally was living in between capitalism and socialism, or some might call it communism. So, and I often find those extreme, you know, these two ends of these spectrums are very, it does not really describe my experience of my relation to other people. And then, you know, years gone by, and in more recent years, I started to study the concept stakeholder theory, which I find is a lot, it really describes our relation to each other as holding stake together. So we are still individual, we're still unique, but we're all holding stake together. So we are bound in a kind of interdependency with each other.
So is that the social contract? Is that another way to
there's
describe
another describe it. So in other words, you know, yes, we are unique. We're different than each other. We're unique, but then at the same time, it really count on us to constantly negotiate with each other in order to live and die well together. So, so that's why, yeah, I think, you know, beyond this sort of challenge of manipulating the material, this is a conceptual model for stakeholder. And you can see in this, even in these images, so, we all hold uneven stake too. You know, some are heavier, some wood are heavy, and some wood are lighter, and some are longer. You know, and then I also try to incorporate domestic object like a flower rolling pin. as opposed to more like outdoorsy thing, like a baseball bat. Maybe you can recognize it. And so there is, yeah, the indoor, outdoor, you know, more feminine, more masculine things, sporty thing, and more recreational things, and, you know, trying to incorporate all the differences together. And then when you install it, you actually have to negotiate with, you know, your fellow installation preparator to try to figure out a way to, so that it won't fall.
So when you did this installation, so it's about 800 pieces, right?
1,000. I mean, if you count all the wood pieces and the 3D parts, it's over 1,000 pieces.
And how many people were you installing with?
We need to have at least 3 people, but you know, it's between 3 to 5 people.
And it took a day, 2 days,
No way.
3 days, a week?
Like 2 weeks to install the Venice one.
So,
Yeah,
and then just as an aside, so a variation on this sculpture, then after the Biennale closed down, the following year went to M+ Museum in Hong Kong, and it was during lockdown. So this massive piece was installed and you were here in Lompoc.
Yes, yeah, so we had to do it through digital media. So they had to set up 4 live cameras so I can have access to the ongoing evolution of the piece. So yeah, we did it. Well, again, because there's no fixed plan to the installation, I guess, you know, if it was a sculpture that had very fixed plan, it would have been easier.
Right, you just would have written down a list of this, do this, this, and this, and you're done.
But this is not, it's supposed to be improvisation, you know, so, and it's very, so it takes a lot of back and forth through the digital screen to play, you know, to listen to each other.
Right.
And then improvise a way so that they won't fall down. Yeah.
All right. Cinematography. So here's the filmmaker piece of this, and this is just going to touch on a couple different things about ways that, and photographers use these as well. So it's not unique to cinematography, but again, thinking through analogy and metaphors. So the saying is, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So if I showed you this picture, you may start to construct a narrative about who this person is. You think it's the ocean or a lake and there's a pier. But then if I take the crop away, now your narrative probably has changed, right? And what I have done in post-production is I've manipulated the field of view for this. So photographers think in lens length, which gives you, so 18 millimeter, and this is relative to a 35 millimeter film. There's a whole bunch of technical stuff not worth going into unless you really want to geek out on the photography stuff. But in general, field of view is talking about how much of an experience am I bounding by the edges of the screen? How much am I capturing? So you can see this is the exact same view, but as I go through and I start to zoom, what happens is the things that are far away become closer, and I start to very much narrow my view. So I like to think of this as being analogous to data or even problem solving. So if I'm thinking about a problem, if I'm thinking about a problem at an 18 millimeter focal length, then I'm trying to solve world hunger. If I think about it at 30 millimeters, I'm trying to solve hunger in Lompoc. And so field of view gets towards scale. And it turns out that scale is actually really important. Time scales, physical scales. So field of view ends up being, I think, a really interesting way to think about how you frame the world, because everything is, I can't see what's behind me right now. I am framing my field of view.
Actually, you can see behind you.
I can, because I've got this camera. That's where the surveillance comes in. So aperture is basically, in a camera lens, you have a series of metal pieces that basically control how big the opening is. In the old days, it was how much light gets to the film. Now it's how much light gets to the photo sensor, that whether it's in your phone or in a camera or a video camera, it's the same concept. They all are changing aperture. So physically what it's doing is it's opening up the aperture, and you may have heard that saying of opening the aperture, and it's letting in more light. So f-stops that's the nomenclature that photographers and cinematographers use for how wide open is that opening. F1.8 meaning it's a big opening, F22 meaning it's a very small opening. And you can see that, as you would expect, the bigger your opening is, the more light comes in. So very straightforward.
But less details.
Well, but there's a byproduct of that, which is when you go F2 now is very open. While it's letting in more light, it's also blurring what's in the background. So it's shallowing your depth of field. Whereas you shoot the exact same thing, F11 is now a very small aperture, and now the things in the back, I can actually get detail on what's going on. So when people talk about opening your aperture to think more broadly about a problem space, they're probably not thinking that one of the byproducts of opening your aperture is you may be shallowing your depth of field, because we can only think about so many things at once, right? At least I like to think that we can only think. And then the last element, and this is one that I brought this up in class with my students last week, and they were not, this was not second nature to them, this concept.
Oh, the point of view?
Of point of view.
Oh.
And this is the whole fact that, and filmmakers have been using this ever since film went from a curiosity to an art form. The point of view changes your relationship with what you're seeing. So in a film, like if the camera is low, then you feel powerless. You feel less power. If you are looking down on something, you are feeling more powerful. And so I haven't changed the characters. I haven't changed the narrative. All I've done is change the point of view of the camera. And it changes now my visceral reaction. So I think that you probably need to think about that when you're thinking about data, how you're collecting data, because if you're doing survey data, your survey is coming from a point of view.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible for something to be completely unbiased. And that point of view is going to influence the reactions. One of my favorite topics.
Which is me?
No. Failure. You are one of my favorite topics, but that's it.
Well, Todd want me to talk about failure, and as someone who worked with real world materials and physics, oftentimes, and then also someone who's open to different kind of materials and process and method, then invariably I will have process that might not meet my expectation. And in this case, it's 3D printing, which is a totally completely new method and technique that I taught myself how to use a 3D printer, and then
we had two of them running full time.
It's not as self-explanatory as I would like it to be, because there's so many variables. Not only the digital file itself, there's many variables to how you
ambient temperature.
Put the code inside the file. It's called a G code actually. And then once you send the file to the 3D printer itself has many different kind of settings, like different temperature setting, different time settings, speed setting. And so at one point, you being the scientist suggests that you should you should make a logbook as if you're logging into this lab.
You need a lab notebook. Yeah.
Which I did, which I find out that really, really helpful. And what happened is that when you open to a process like this, I'm not in my, a lot of people use 3D printer to make functional object, either
To
they
solve a specific problem.
right, either they function and work or they don't. But for me, this is for a sculpture, which is a conceptual model for negotiation and stakeholders. So in my case, when I come up with an object of a print object that actually quote unquote fail, it actually within the sculpture context, it does not necessarily means that I could not use it, because in this case, I don't know if you can see at the very bottom part of the hanging part that is a 3D printed joinery with 3 ways. And I don't know what happened. It's shifted. So it's printing, but then all of a sudden, the middle of the process is shifted. And then you can see that it's for some reason the 3D printer keep going. So you can see this noodle like hanging because it's still printing, but then it printed enough material so for it to continue to print. So the very top end actually still function as a connector. So I was still able to use it in a way. But since the piece is called negotiated difference, and I thought, the machine maybe want to make its own art. So, at that point, I'm not kidding. Like at that point, I said, oh, maybe the 3D printer want to join,
Wants to be part of the
wants
process.
to be part of the process, then we can co-create this piece. Because if I were to leave it up to my own personal preference, then I would never have come up with this interesting form, with the noodle dripping down. So I really quite like it.
And most people,
I did check the size, check the Caltech, what do you call it, the earthquake graft to see if we had
see
an
if they had an
earthquake
earthquake?
that night because it shifted.
well, so
No, there was no earthquake. Anyway,
to me, what's interesting is most people who use 3D printing as a means to an end, this would have ended up thrown away.
right.
And we would have never considered that that was what the machine maybe wanted to do. And it's functional enough that you can incorporate it into it. So I think there's something about also thinking about equity issues in society and the fact that not everybody comes out as a perfect 3D printed object with all of the capabilities, but it doesn't mean that they can't be part of the work. That's my
That's your narrative.
That's my narrative on that.
Yeah.
All right, improvisation. So
Oh yeah.
did I tell you this story and then you've adopted it, or did we discover it at the same time?
I don't remember.
I don't remember. Anyway,
That's great.
so the story goes, Herbie Hancock started playing with Miles Davis when he was like 18 years old.
Hmm.
So they're out playing on a gig, and Herbie tells the story of he's playing piano behind Miles, and Miles is in the middle of a solo, and Herbie hit the wrong chord, and he froze. He was horrified, and then he heard Miles immediately change his solo line to follow Herbie's wrong chord.
And making it really great.
So he made it so even though Herbie played a wrong chord, Miles made that chord right because he was listening, primarily because he was listening, and then secondly because he was a brilliant improviser.
Mm-hmm.
And brilliant improvisation doesn't mean, to quote Homer Simpson, jazz, they're just making it all up. Improvisation it's not that you go in unprepared, it's actually that you go in over prepared, but that you're open to whatever happens in the moment, and then you react to it and you're having a conversation. I think it's you're teaching your Ask Shirley course right now, right, at Cal Arts.
Yeah.
And this is a course where you have no idea what's going to happen from class to class.
because they're the ones who are bringing the students are bringing the topics and the questions.
Yeah, I'm currently teaching a class at Cal. But by the way, I actually use this example in my class a lot, to show that how important it is to be open and also to listen to your own process sometime, or if you're in collaboration, to listen to each other and not make any assumption, because I guess the moral of that story is there's no wrong note.
No.
If you are always ready to be in the process in the moment, then you can always make, you are creating a relation to the thing that comes right before you. So in that sense, there is no wrong note. Whatever that things come before you, then you can turn it into something really constructive. Right. So the Australian class, yes, in a way it is that. I've been at Cal Arts for 21 years now. So in the early years of my teaching career there, I oftentimes have some topic or agenda I want to quote unquote teach. I feel like I have something to deliver, like
stakeholders
or plastic,
right.
In my early days. But in more recent years, I feel that I have I have taught the things that I had wanted to talk, and then in me maturing as a teacher, I also hear that your student body changes from year to year, and the time changes, and I can be the one who determine what is most current and relevant to the time. So and then at a certain point I decided, what, I'm just gonna forgo all agenda. I have no agenda. I'm gonna let the student decide what they want to be taught. Actually, to rephrase it, I'm instead of teaching content, I'm gonna teach them how to teach themselves.
How to answer questions.
Yeah, how to become an autodidact.
Right.
So the class is called Ask Shirley, but then it's structured in a way that they submit question to me or to the class, and then we all come up with a way to answer this question. And in the process, is about understanding how to define your question. You come up with a method, and then you do trial and error to see if it worked or not. So it's really about a methodology of how to answer your own question.
And it's actually a lot of work.
It's a lot of work.
It's way more work because you have to be
on my feet all the time.
Yeah, you have to be.
I come in class, I have no idea what's going to happen that day. I don't know what question they're going to raise. But it's a lot of fun.
Right. All right, the last story. So being fearless, and that gets to so
it is.
That's fearless teaching.
I taught myself trying to be fearless.
And when I go and I take a solo and I play, like I auditioned a band I've been playing with now for 2 years. My audition was on a live gig, and I asked the band leader, I said, "Can you send me a list of songs?" And he said, "No." And he said, we'll just be playing and you'll figure it out. And I said, thumbs up. I could not have done that 10 years now, but actually I'm much more fearless now musically than I was 10 years ago. So if you Google being fearless, you'll pull up a Getty image, stock image of some sort of thing, somebody rock climbing or whatever it is. Okay, great. That's what Google thinks being fearless is. I think there's a much more important thing, which is actually your first step, is which you got to show up. The act of being fearless is actually showing up every day for whatever it is, whether it's work, whether it's class, whether it's as a parent, as a sibling, as a spouse, as a partner. You got to show up, and that requires you to be fearless. Once you show up, then you go on and do the next thing. But if you don't, stakeholders, as a colleague of mine says, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
So you've got to show up. My other
funny.
favorite quote is from the world of racing, which is, in order to finish first, first you must finish. Meaning, if you crash in the first corner of the first lap and your race is over, you can't win. So there you have 11 stories that hopefully one of them resonated with you. And if none of them did, then I would challenge you to find your own story that does resonate. And with that, I will turn it back to Sinead.
Thank you very much. A very warm thank you to both Todd and Shirley. That was excellent. I want to make sure that we have a little bit of time for questions. I know that we're almost at the top of the hour. So was there anyone who wanted to unmute and ask a question or a reaction? Anyone? Sure. While we're waiting just to see if there's anyone who has any questions.
Everyone, to Todd and Ms. A for this wonderful presentation. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any question? Be fearless.
Shirley, I had a question for you, and I apologize. My internet connection's going in and out. You said you did not study any physics, and a lot of your okay, so I was just really amazed by your sculptures that don't require any nails. How long would you say, and I'm sure it's a process, that it took you to learn how to do that particular technique?
Well, if you're talking about the wood turning, I think it took me at least turn on a lathe. And then in terms of the 3D printing, I don't know, like a year?
Probably.
Yeah, about a year. And then in terms of balancing this thing, I will say that in the process, I made the connector, the 3D printer, to have many different angles. So that allowed me to easily change angles so that it makes it possible to balance off each other. So that is a built-in flexibility to it. So a lot of trial and error.
But also you've done a number of pieces and have a whole series called Quantum Shirley, where you're exploring quantum mechanics.
Right, that's true.
And you're not trained as a physicist. So
Yeah.
how did you get enough quantum mechanics to be able to make work?
But you're the one who taught me this is actually not quantum. This is really big. It's Newtonian physics.
This is right, but I'm saying you also learned enough quantum physics to be able to make work on that.
I'm interested. This work is not directly related to quantum physics.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying separate work, but when you talk about physics broadly, there's the Newtonian physics, but you also taught yourself enough quantum mechanics to make work.
Yes.
And so how did you do that? Because
well, I'm interested in the quantum theory mostly. That is not why I'm interested in quantum theory. Has less to do with gravity. It's more to do with reality. The fact that there's many different reality. I think that is fascinating concept for an artist. I often imagine, there's another me that exists in a different world. This is way before even starting to study quantum physics. And just, I don't really need quantum physics to validate my imagination of another Shirley living in another world. But the fact that there is an actual different discipline that provide a model for thinking in a very similar way, I just think that is beautiful.
Right.
So you can have this idea of a multiple world, just through poetry or art, but then you can also have this the same idea through science. I think that's just beautiful.
And also through Rick and Morty. So.
Yeah, but I think Nikki has a hand. Yes.
Hi, thank you both for this presentation. My name is Mickey Harris. I'm a professor at Morehouse, and I teach a multimedia journalism class, and have brought in virtual reality into the class, but I'm new to it. And so I wanted to know, do you have any, well, two questions. One, do you have any either channels or storytellers that you think are really strong that have some good narrative storytelling in VR, going past avatar creation and pedagogy, but how do we actually build empathy and
Sure. So
Yeah,
I will say no, there aren't any. And this is the main failing of VR right now. Well, there's a lot of failings of VR, but people have underestimated how hard it is to tell compelling stories in an immersive environment. So, you know, my joke is that humans created immersive narratives thousands of years ago. So the caves of Altamira, right? Cave paintings are immersive, came along and created the proscenium arch, and they screwed everything up. And ever since the proscenium arch came, we've been telling stories within screen boundaries. So whether it's a painting that has a frame, or television or film, photography, right? We have become very good at telling stories within a frame boundary. VR removes the frame boundary. So now we don't know how to tell a story, especially one that has a temporal aspect. So directors are used to controlling where the user looks, and VR gives the user agency, right? So anybody who's creating narratives in VR. So there needs to be a breakthrough, which is the equivalent of editing film. So if you go back to the early days of Thomas Edison and film, conceptual leap that helped to elevate film from being a curiosity, technical curiosity, to an art form. That type of conceptual leap hasn't happened in VR yet. And the only way to do it is by experimenting. My two favorite things, if you want people to go into VR, and I've had really good success doing that. The whole VR is an empathy machine. I actually think it's the opposite. I think it's an anti-empathy machine. I think it gives false empathy, and there's a whole other, we could have a whole other, we've got a long line conversation. To me, the two best VR experiences some of our students wanted to try and experiment with VR looking at sexual assault. So what they did was they created a VR environment of a college frat party. And you go into VR and you see this obviously drunk girl stumbling to the bathroom, and then you see creepy guy following her into the bathroom. And then because it's VR, we want to leverage the strength of VR, which is I can rewind, right? I can go back in time. And so I can relive that reality. And so we set up the environment so that and it was an attract space, room scale VR. So you rewind it, and now you see drunk girl going, you see creepy guy, and you can walk in front of creepy guy and stop him. Or you can talk to, you can say, hey,
bystander
yeah,
intervention.
so we were trying to see, can bystander intervention actually be amped up using VR? That was a prototype just to explore the question. We don't have any data on whether or not we you know, that approach actually worked, but we think it has power. The other, sorry, I get, see that it's storytelling time. We had another experience where we put you on top of a 5-story building in VR, and you're looking down, and we would, while the person's in VR, one of my colleagues would get a big piece of fiberboard and wave it like this, so that a breeze would hit the person in VR on top of the building, and you would see them step back from the edge of the building. So we also know that more of your senses need to get pulled into this for us to really nail the sort of humanity edge of this. But yeah, I would, Sinead, if you can connect us by email, I'm happy to talk, because I've done a lot of work in this area, and I can send you down some rabbit holes that may or may not be interesting.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Harris. Any other final questions or comments, reactions? Todd, I really appreciated your story about playing the wrong note. I think that resonated with me quite a bit.